The midday sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of the Route 7 gas station. Silas, his hands calloused and stained from a lifetime of working the land, topped off the tank of his beat-up, 20-year-old pickup truck. Rust bloomed on its faded red paint like stubborn weeds, and one tail light was held in place with duct tape. It was a working truck, nothing more, a tool like his shovel or his tractor. It got the job done. He wore faded overalls, a worn plaid shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low, shielding tired eyes that had seen too many sunrises. Silas moved with the deliberate slowness of age, every joint a quiet protest against movement, but there was a steady, grounded strength in his posture, a stillness that spoke of deep roots. A roar shattered the quiet hum of the pumps. A line of motorcycles, chrome gleaming and engines spitting thunder, pulled into the station. Black leather, denim, and patches covered the riders. The lead bike, a massive custom cruiser, bore the insignia of the Iron Vultures, a stylized vulture skull clamped around a motorcycle engine. Their presence was a storm front, pushing the peaceful air aside with noise and menace. The lead rider, a hulking man named Hammer with a tangled beard and eyes like chips of flint, killed his engine and swung a heavy leg over the seat. He scanned the small station, his gaze dismissive until it landed on Silas and his truck. A slow, cruel grin spread across his face. He nudged the rider next to him, pointing with a gloved thumb. Laughter, loud and grating, erupted from the group. They dismounted, stretching with exaggerated swagger, filling the space with their bulk and the smell of exhaust, oil, and stale sweat. They surrounded Silas's truck, circling it like predators. "Well, looky here," Hammer boomed, his voice rough as gravel. "What in the rust bucket is this thing?" Another biker, Razor, lean and sharp-featured, kicked a tire. "Looks like scrap metal on wheels, Hammer. Surprised it ain't sprouted potatoes yet." More laughter. They slapped the side of the truck, leaving greasy prints on the faded paint. They mocked the duct-tape tail light, the worn seats visible through the window. Silas stood by the pump, his face impassive, letting them finish. He finished filling his tank, screwed the cap back on, and hung the nozzle up carefully. "Something wrong, old-timer?" Hammer asked, stepping closer, invading Silas's personal space. His eyes held a challenge, a blatant disrespect. "Your ride offend you? We could put it out of its misery." Silas turned, his movement still slow, but his eyes, when they met Hammer's, were surprisingly clear and steady. The easy humor was gone, replaced by something quiet and cold. "It gets me where I need to go." "Yeah. Looks like it gets you to the retirement home," Razor sneered, joining Hammer. "Maybe you should trade it in. Get something shiny. Course, might need to sell your teeth for scrap to afford it." The bikers around them laughed again, a wave of arrogant sound. They were enjoying this, finding sport in belittling an older man in a beat-up truck. Silas took a step back, giving himself a little room. His hands, large and strong despite the signs of age, hung loosely at his sides. He looked past Hammer and Razor, at the grinning faces of the other vultures. There were 7 of them in total. Hammer, Razor, a hulking brute named Ox, and 4 others. They looked tough, mean, and utterly confident in their numbers and reputation. "This station," Silas said, his voice low, barely audible over the idling motorcycles. "It's private property." "So what?" Hammer scoffed. "We go where we please, old man. Maybe we should just take it. Run it ourselves. Charge folks double for gas." "You wouldn't be the first," Silas said. His gaze was steady, unwavering. "And they didn't stay long either." Hammer's face darkened. The casual cruelty vanished, replaced by genuine irritation. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "Listen, Pops. We're the Iron Vultures. This county's ours. Everything in it. Your rust bucket, this station. You understand?" Silas tilted his head slightly. No. I don't think I do. Hammer took another step, raising a hand, a clear threat in his eyes. Maybe we need to explain it clearer. You know. A little. Physical demonstration. The air crackled with sudden tension. The casual mockery was gone, replaced by imminent violence. The other bikers started to close in, anticipation on their faces. Silas didn't move. He just watched Hammer's hand rise. And then, in a movement that defied his apparent age and slowness, he was suddenly not there. Hammer's raised hand swung through empty air. Before he could react, Silas had shifted inside his guard, a blur of motion. One calloused hand clamped down on Hammer's wrist with surprising force, twisting it sharply. With the other, Silas delivered a short, sharp jab to the solar plexus. Hammer gasped, his eyes wide with shock, the air knocked out of him. The hand gripping his wrist twisted harder, forcing him to bend forward. Silas leaned in, his voice a low growl meant only for Hammer. "Get your hands off me. Get your hands off my property. Get off this station. And get out of this county." Razor lunged forward, a knife flashing in his hand. Silas released Hammer, letting the big biker stumble back, clutching his gut. Silas pivoted smoothly, facing Razor. He didn't try to block or parry. He simply moved with the attack, sidestepping the blade. As Razor swept past, off balance, Silas's foot shot out, tripping him. Razor hit the ground hard, the knife skittering away. Before he could scramble up, Silas was on him, one foot pinning his knife hand to the ground. Silas looked down at him, his expression unreadable. The other four bikers stared, frozen for a moment. Hammer, still gasping, straightened up, his face red with fury and humiliation. "Get him," he roared. The remaining bikers charged. Silas didn't run. He didn't panic. He moved. This wasn't the clumsy fight of an old man. This was the fluid, economical movement of someone highly trained, someone who understood angles, leverage, and momentum. He met the first biker head-on, sidestepping a wild swing and using the man's own momentum to spin him around, shoving him hard into the path of the second biker. They collided, stumbling back. The third biker swung a heavy fist. Silas ducked under it, coming up inside the man's guard. A quick, brutal elbow to the side of the head sent the biker staggering. Ox, the largest of the remaining vultures, moved with surprising speed. He was a wall of muscle. Silas didn't try to outmuscle him. He danced around him, weaving away from powerful swings. He waited for his opening. When Ox overextended slightly, Silas seized it. He feinted high, then dropped low, hooking a leg behind Ox's knee and shoving hard. Ox crashed down with a grunt that shook the pavement. The remaining biker hesitated, looking from his fallen comrades to Silas, who stood calmly amidst the wreckage. Silas met his gaze, a silent challenge in his eyes. The biker swallowed hard and backed away slowly. Hammer, recovered slightly, looked at his scattered crew. Ox groaning on the ground, Razor pinned, two more rubbing bruised heads, and one clearly deciding retreat was the better option. His eyes, narrowed with rage and confusion, fixed on Silas. Who the hell are you?" Silas walked over to Razor, keeping his foot on the man's hand. He picked up the dropped knife, examining the blade briefly before tossing it aside into the dirt. "Just a farmer," he said. His voice was quiet again, but it carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Who wants you off his property?" Hammer knew defeat when he saw it. Not just physical defeat, but a profound, unexpected humiliation. This unassuming old man had taken down his toughest guys in seconds. He didn't understand how. He didn't understand who. But he understood the cold, absolute finality in the farmer's eyes. "This ain't over, old man." Hammer spat, venom in his voice. "You made a mistake. A big one. You got no idea who you just messed with." Silas simply looked at him. Seems to me, he said softly, you're the one who has no idea. Hammer signaled to his remaining conscious men. They helped the others up, grudgingly and painfully. Razor scrambled away when Silas removed his foot. They retreated to their bikes, the air thick with bruised egos and simmering vengeance. Hammer cast one last, hate-filled glance at Silas before roaring his engine to life and leading his diminished, humiliated crew out of the station, leaving behind the smell of burned rubber and defeat. Silas watched them go, his face returning to its usual quiet lines. He bent down, picked up the discarded knife, and tucked it into his overalls pocket. He looked around the station. Nothing damaged except the collective pride of the iron vultures. The attendant, a young man named Miguel, came out from behind the counter, eyes wide with shock and awe. "Mr. Silas," Miguel breathed. "What? What was that?" Silas just gave a small, weary smile. "Just handled some pests, Miguel. They won't be back." Miguel looked skeptical, then at the road where the bikes had disappeared. "They're the iron vultures, Mr. Silas. They always come back. And they always bring more." "We'll see," Silas said. He nodded towards the back of the station. "Anything broken?" "No, sir. They were being loud and pushy, then." Miguel trailed off, still trying to process the sudden, brutal efficiency of Silas's actions. "All right then," Silas got into his truck. The door creaked open. He settled into the worn seat. Before starting the engine, he looked back at Miguel. "Lock up tight tonight, son. Just in case." Miguel nodded, still stunned. Silas started the old truck. The engine coughed to life. As he pulled out of the station, heading back towards his farm, the quiet demeanor had returned. But something fundamental had shifted. The peace he sought was now explicitly threatened. He knew men like Hammer. They understood only one language, force. And they never forgot a slight. The fight, he knew, had just begun. Back at the Iron Vultures clubhouse on the outskirts of town, a ramshackle building fortified with barbed wire and guarded by watchful eyes, the mood was ugly. Hammer paced the main room, his jaw clenched, periodically clutching his still sore gut. Razor nursed a bruised hand. Ox sat heavily, his head throbbing. He moved like nothing I ever saw," Hammer growled. "Like smoke. And strong. Damn strong for an old geezer. Didn't even look like he was trying," Razor added, rubbing his wrist. "Just snapped my hand back. And that trip. Like I wasn't even there." "Ox?" Hammer demanded. "He felt like solid rock when I tried to hit him," Ox rumbled. "And that trip. Clean. Like judo or something. He ain't just some old farmer." "No kidding." Hammer slammed a fist on a table. "But who? Nobody around here fights like that. Nobody old fights like that. He's gotta be something. Maybe he was military." Razor suggested hesitantly. "Spec ops. They train like that." Hammer snorted. "Old man in a potato truck. Spec ops. Don't be stupid, Razor. They retire to Florida, not dusty farms." "Well, wherever he learned it," Ox said, "he's trouble." "Trouble we gotta handle," Hammer said, his voice cold. Humiliation burned hotter than pain. He had to reassert dominance. He had to make an example. "He thinks he can just waltz in and kick us around. On our territory. He's gotta learn." "What about the county?" Razor asked. "He told us to get out of the county." Hammer laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Let him try and make us. He's one old man. We got the whole damn club. We got connections. He ain't seen nothing, yet." He stopped pacing, a cruel gleam in his eyes. Find out everything about him. Where he lives, where he goes, who he talks to. Everything. I want to know who this farmer thinks he is. And then we're gonna teach him about respect. Vulture style. The escalation was immediate and brutal. The iron vultures weren't known for subtlety or patience. Their wounded pride demanded swift, overwhelming retaliation. They didn't just want to defeat Silas, they wanted to crush him, break him, and make the entire county witness to the consequences of defying them. They started small, testing the waters, sending a message. Vandalizing local businesses that had shown support for Silas in the past, a diner where he sometimes ate, the hardware store where he bought supplies. Windows were smashed, walls were spray-painted with the vulture symbol. They harassed people on the roads Silas was known to travel, tailing cars closely, running people off the shoulder. Fear, which had momentarily receded after Silas's display at the gas station, began to creep back into the community. Silas, meanwhile, wasn't sitting idle. The quiet facade remained, but beneath it, a different kind of engine was turning over. He spent his days on the farm, working the fields, but his mind was elsewhere. He drove his truck on his usual routes, but his eyes were sharper, scanning the roadsides, noting parked vehicles, unusual faces. He wasn't just farming, he was conducting reconnaissance. He also made calls. Not on a cell phone, but on an old, encrypted satellite phone he kept locked away. Calls to numbers that hadn't been dialed in years. Calls to men and women who were, like him, veterans of a different kind of conflict, a different kind of war. People who had learned the hard lessons of survival and strategy in places far removed from dusty county roads. His first contact was a man named Frank. Frank ran a welding and auto shop just outside the county seat. He was a burly man with grease under his fingernails and a quiet demeanor that belied a sharp mind and a past serving alongside Silas in a unit whose existence was officially denied. Silas drove the beat-up truck to Frank's shop late one afternoon. The smell of acetylene and hot metal hung in the air. Frank looked up from a chassis he was working on, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag. His eyes, initially tired, widened slightly when he saw Silas. "Silas," Frank said, his voice quiet. "Haven't heard from you in. What, 15 years?" "Trouble, Frank," Silas replied, stepping into the shop. "County's got a vulture problem." Frank leaned against the chassis, crossing his arms. He knew Silas. Knew that trouble coming from him meant something significant, something requiring a specific set of skills. The iron vultures thought they were just loud noise and cheap drugs. "They're branching out," Silas said, his gaze steady. "Protection rackets. Pushing into the farming territory. Started harassing folks. Tried to take over Miguel's station." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Miguel? Nice kid. Tried to rough him up." "They tried to rough me up," Silas corrected. He didn't elaborate on the gas station incident. He didn't need to. Frank could read between the lines. A slow grin spread across Frank's face. "Ah. So that's what they tried." Silas nodded. "They didn't like it. Escalating now. Vandalism, intimidation. They think they own the place." "This place?" Frank gestured around his shop, then towards the fields beyond. "They think they own this." "That's where you come in," Silas said. "I need eyes. Information. And maybe a little muscle." Frank pushed off the chassis, walking towards a toolbox. He didn't hesitate. "You got it, Silas. For you. Anytime. What do you need?" "Intel first," Silas said. "Their numbers. Who the leaders are. Their habits. Where they stash things. Use your network. Gas stations, truck stops, farmhands. They see things." "Consider it done," Frank said. He pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook and a pencil stub. And the muscle? Not yet, Silas said. Need to plan. Need to know what we're dealing with. This isn't just Hammer and his goons. This is organized. All right, Frank said, jotting notes. Anyone else you thinking of calling? Silas hesitated for a moment. Maybe. Depends how bad it gets. There's Sarah. Frank stopped writing, his eyes meeting Silas's. Sarah. Dr. Sarah Jenkins. Former combat medic, trauma surgeon, and one of the most formidable women they knew. She'd seen things nobody should see, done things few could do. She ran a small, quiet medical clinic in the next county over now. Sarah, Frank repeated, a hint of respect and caution in his voice. Yeah. If it gets Sarah level bad. We're really in it. Silas just nodded. They understood each other without needing to spell it out. While Silas and Frank began their quiet information gathering, the Iron Vultures made their major move, the one that truly galvanized the community and raised the stakes beyond vandalism and harassment. They hit the annual county fair. It was a local tradition, a gathering of farmers, families, and businesses. A symbol of community spirit. The Vultures chose it deliberately. They rode in, loud and disruptive, scattering families, overturning stalls, and intimidating vendors. They weren't just being thuggish, they were asserting dominance, showing that nowhere was safe, that their power was absolute. The local sheriff's department, under Sheriff Brody, was outmatched and underfunded. His deputies were good people, but they weren't equipped for this kind of organized intimidation. The Vultures knew it. They pushed, and the deputies had to back down, focusing on preventing injuries rather than confronting the gang head-on. It was a humiliation for law enforcement and a terrifying display for the townspeople. Amidst the chaos, Hammer stood on an overturned hay bale, laughing, broadcasting his twisted victory. "This is our county now," he yelled over the panicked murmuring. "You pay us, or you get more of this. Your sheriff can't protect you. Nobody can." That night, a pall of fear hung over the county like a physical fog. People were scared. Scared to go out, scared for their businesses, scared for their families. Some whispered about leaving. Others talked about trying to pay the Vultures, anything to make it stop. This was the moment Silas knew he couldn't wait. The problem wasn't just at his gas station, it was infecting the heart of the community. The stakes had just gone sky high. This wasn't about defending property anymore. It was about defending people. Their way of life. Their dignity. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Your engagement means a lot to us, as telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. Tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Silas called Frank again. They hit the fair. Yeah, Frank's voice was grim. Saw it on the local news feed. Animals. Scared the hell out of everyone. We need to move, Silas said. His voice was calm, but Frank heard the steel beneath it. This was the voice Silas used when the plan was made, and the time for talking was over. Intel? Got some, Frank reported. They got a couple of houses they use as safe houses, mostly for storage and sleeping. Main clubhouse is fortified, like you'd expect. Lots of guys coming and going. Looks like Hammer brought in some heavy hitters after what happened at Miguel's. Bigger bikes, look like they came from out of state. Numbers? Hard count. Maybe 20, 25 regulars, Frank said. With the new guys. Maybe 30, pushing 40. They're confident. Silas was silent for a moment, processing the numbers. 40 against him and Frank. Not enough. He needed more. He needed the best he knew. Frank, Silas said. It's time. Call Sarah. On it, Frank replied. Anyone else? There's Sheriff Brody, Silas said. He's a good man, but he's outgunned. He's fighting corruption too, isn't he? Rumor is some of the county commissioners are on the Vulture's payroll. That's the talk, Frank confirmed. Brody's got clean hands, but his budget got slashed last year. Can't afford the gear or the overtime to patrol properly, let alone raid a fortified clubhouse. He might not be able to fight them head-on, Silas said. But he knows the county. The blind spots. The legal angles. He knows who's dirty. He's an asset. See if you can make contact. Carefully. Tell him. Tell him I'm offering assistance. Off the books. Frank paused. Off the books with Sheriff Brody? That's a risk. Everything's a risk now, Frank, Silas said. Staying quiet is a bigger one. Brody needs to know someone's willing to back him up. Someone who isn't afraid to step outside the usual process. All right, Frank agreed. I'll find a way to sound him out. What's the plan, Silas? We hit their operations, Silas said. Piece by piece. Intel from you, tactics from. Well, from us. We make it unprofitable, make it painful. We disrupt their flow. We draw them out. We show the county they can be fought. And we isolate Hammer. Draw them out where? My place, Silas said without hesitation. Plenty of room. Plenty of advantages. They want me, they'll have to come get me. On my ground. Frank whistled softly. That's a bold play, Silas. They bring 40 guys, and you bring. What? Me and Sarah. We'll bring who we need to, Silas said. And we'll use the terrain. And we'll use their arrogance against them. They think they're coming for an old farmer. They don't know what kind of ground they'll be standing on. Sheriff Brody was a weary man. His days were spent dealing with the fallout of the Vulture's activities, scared citizens, vandalized businesses, frustrated deputies. He sat in his small, Spartan office, staring at a map of the county. Pins marked incident locations, spreading like a rash. He knew who was doing it. He knew who was behind it. But proving it in court was tough, and confronting them directly was currently beyond his force's capabilities. He'd requested backup from the state police, but they were stretched thin. A knock on his door made him look up. Deputy Miller, a young woman with a keen mind and a steady resolve, entered. Miller was one of the good ones, untainted by the subtle rot of corruption that had seeped into some parts of the county administration. Sheriff, she said. Got a message. Kind of strange. Strange how, Miller? Came from Frank's auto, she said. You know Frank? Runs the shop on Route 12. Brody nodded. No Frank. Good mechanic. Quiet fella. What about him? Says he knows someone who might be able to help with. The Vultures, Miller hesitated. Someone who had a run-in with them already. At the gas station near the edge of town. Brody's eyebrows shot up. He'd heard rumors about that. About some old guy who'd somehow sent Hammer and his boys packing. He dismissed it as exaggeration, wishful thinking. Frank says this person isn't law enforcement, Miller continued. But they have relevant experience. And they're offering resources. And intel. Off the record. Brody leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. Relevant experience. Off the record. Sounds like. Well, it sounds unofficial, Miller. Risky. Frank vouched for him, Miller said. He said the guy is reliable. And that he knows what he's doing. He used the phrase, handled situations like this before, in worse places. That phrase caught Brody's attention. In worse places, that didn't sound like a local tough. That sounded like something else. His mind went back to the rumors. An old man. At the gas station. Impossible speed. Does Frank say who this is? Brody asked. Said you know him, Miller replied. Said his name is Silas. Brody stared at Miller for a long moment. Silas? Silas who owned that huge farm. The quiet farmer. The one everyone respected. The one who rarely left his land unless it was for supplies. Silas, Brody repeated slowly. He knew Silas. Had for years. Always seemed like a solid citizen. Hard worker. Quiet. Never heard a bad word about him. But capable of taking on the iron vultures. It seemed absurd. Yet, Frank's message, the rumors. He looked at the map again. The spreading pins of vulture attacks. The helplessness he felt. Official channels weren't working fast enough. Maybe unofficial was the only way. All right, Miller, Brody said, making a decision. Set up a meeting. Somewhere neutral. Just me. And Frank. And this. Silas. Frank arranged the meeting for later that week, deep in the woods on the edge of Silas's property, miles from any roads, accessible only by ATV trails Silas knew intimately. Sheriff Brody arrived alone, leaving Deputy Miller at the edge of the woods. Silas was there, dressed in his usual work clothes, leaning against a tree. Frank stood beside him. Brody stepped off his ATV, sizing up the two men. Silas looked exactly as Brody expected, quiet, unassuming, the picture of a man who spent his life working the soil. But there was a subtle difference now, something Brody hadn't noticed before. A watchfulness in his eyes, a tension held deep in his muscles that was more than just the weariness of age. Silas, Brody said, extending a hand. Sheriff Brody. Thanks for meeting me. Silas shook his hand. His grip was firm, surprisingly strong. Sheriff. Thanks for coming out here. Frank said you might have some information, Brody started, getting straight to the point. About the vultures. And maybe some help. I do, Silas confirmed. He looked at Frank, who nodded. Frank's already gathered a bit. Safe houses, numbers. It's more than you've probably got officially. We're working blind on some of this, Brody admitted. Sources are scared to talk. Half the county's terrified. Which is exactly what they want, Silas said. Fear is their currency. They break people down with it, he paused, looking out into the dense woods surrounding them. I fought men like them before. Different uniforms, different flags, but the same methods. Intimidation. Violence. Breaking the will to resist. Brody looked at Silas, a question in his eyes. Frank said you had relevant experience. Worse places. Silas met his gaze directly. Served for 20 years, Sheriff. Special operations. Saw a lot of sand, a lot of mountains. Learned how these things work. How to dismantle them. Brody was stunned. Special operations. This quiet farmer. It seemed impossible. But the way Silas said it, the calm certainty in his voice, the look in his eyes. It wasn't a lie. It explained the gas station incident. It explained why Frank vouched for him so strongly. 20 years, Brody breathed. Why? Why farm? Wanted peace, Silas said simply. Came back. Bought this land. Worked it. Figured I'd seen enough violence for one lifetime. Guess I was wrong. So you're not just offering intel, Brody stated. No, Silas confirmed. They made it personal. They hurt my people. My community. This land. I won't let them take it. I won't let them break the people here. He looked at Brody. You're fighting a good fight, Sheriff. But you're doing it by the book, against an enemy that doesn't read. Sometimes, you need to use a different playbook. Brody understood. Silas wasn't asking for permission. He was stating a fact. He was going to fight back. And he was offering Brody a chance to be on the right side of it, even if it meant bending some rules. What kind of help are you talking about? Brody asked, cautious but intrigued. Tactical, Silas said. Intel. Resources. I know how they operate. How to find their weaknesses. How to hit them where it hurts. He hesitated, then added, and yes, manpower. I've got contacts. People like Frank. People who understand this kind of problem. People from your past. Brody guessed. Silas nodded. They value loyalty. And justice. Just like we do. Brody thought hard. This was way outside procedure. Collaborating with a civilian, even a former military one, on an active gang investigation. It could cost him his badge. But doing nothing was costing his community its safety, its livelihood, its hope. And he looked at Silas, this unassuming farmer who was secretly a highly trained operator, and saw a potential solution, maybe the only solution. All right, Silas, Brody said finally. Unofficial. Completely. Anything you share with me, anything we do together, stays between us and anyone else you bring in. No official reports. No paper trail. If this blows up in my face, I'm on my own. Understood, Sheriff, Silas said. And if it blows up in mine? You never heard of me. Brody managed a thin smile. Deal. So, what's step one? Intel, Silas repeated. Frank's network is starting. We need to map their movements, their storage points. Any place they feel safe. And we need to know who the new guys are, the ones Hammer brought in. They're likely more professional, more dangerous. My deputies can keep an eye out, Brody offered. Subtly. Traffic stops, patrols. Look for anything unusual. Out-of-state plates, large cash transactions, suspicious cargo. Stuff we can log officially without raising flags. Good, Silas approved. Every little bit helps. And I'll have Frank reach out to Sarah. We'll need her medical expertise, worst comes to worst. But she's also got other skills. Useful ones. Sarah Jenkins arrived a few days later, pulling up to Silas's farm in a nondescript SUV. She was a woman in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, composed, with a quiet strength that radiated from her. She wore jeans and a practical jacket. When she hugged Silas, it was with genuine affection, but there was a reserved intensity about her. Frank was already there, going over some rough maps on Silas's kitchen table. Silas introduced Sarah to Frank properly, though they knew of each other. Silas said it's getting bad, Sarah said, sitting down. They hit the county fair, Silas confirmed. Terrifying people. Sheriff's hands are tied. Sarah's face tightened. Animals. Exactly, Silas said. They need to be stopped. Permanently. Silas thinks we can poke them, Frank said, gesturing at the map. Hit their revenue streams. Make noise. Get them to react. Draw the main group here. Sarah studied the map. Your farm, Silas. That's a big risk. It's defensible, Silas said. And I know every inch of it. They don't. It's our best option for controlling the engagement. Okay, Sarah said slowly. Tactically, I see the logic. Draw them onto ground of our choosing. Use the environment. Minimize collateral damage. Exactly, Silas confirmed. Frank's getting intel on their safe houses. Storage. Maybe some smaller operations. We hit those first. Quietly. Discreetly. Deniable. Deniable, Frank echoed with a grin. My specialty. My specialty is putting people back together after deniable operations go sideways, Sarah said dryly. Let's try to avoid that. What's the target list? Frank pointed to a couple of locations marked on the map. 2 houses. Supposedly holding stolen goods and maybe some cash from their rackets. Lightly guarded, maybe 2 or 3 guys at each. All right, Sarah said. We recon first. Confirm the intel. Then we go in. Quietly. No killing unless absolutely necessary. Scare them, take their stuff, plant seeds of doubt. Make them wonder who's hitting them. And how they're finding the locations, Silas added. Make them paranoid. The planning session continued late into the night. Silas, Frank, and Sarah, a farmer, a mechanic, and a doctor, were transforming back into the operators they once were. They spoke in low voices, using jargon Brody wouldn't have understood, drawing diagrams, discussing entry points, angles of fire, potential escape routes. The quiet farmhouse kitchen had become a command center. Meanwhile, in the county seat, Sheriff Brody and Deputy Miller were also working late. Miller was sorting through recent traffic tickets, looking for out-of-state license plates seen around known vulture haunts. Brody was reviewing incident reports, trying to connect dots. Sheriff, Miller said, holding up a ticket. Got a few hits on Nevada plates. Different bikes, but same state. All tagged near the old abandoned quarry off Route 5-inch. Brody looked at the location on the map. The quarry. Isolated. Plenty of places to hide things. Anything else on those plates? Ran them through the national database, Miller said. One came back to a registered vehicle owned by a shell corporation in Las Vegas. Another is listed as stolen. The third. Nothing. Like it doesn't exist. Nevada, Brody mused. Shell Corporation. Stolen plates. Doesn't sound like your average local gang member, Miller. No, sir, Miller agreed. Sounds like professionals. Brody thought of Silas. Hammer brought in some heavy hitters. More professional, more dangerous. Silas was right. The stakes were rising even higher. Keep digging on those, Brody instructed. And let's get a quiet patrol out towards that quarry. Just observation. No engagement. I want to know who's coming and going. Silas's plan went into action. Frank and Sarah, moving with the practiced stealth of operators, conducted reconnaissance on the 2 target houses. Frank, posing as a door-to-door salesman or just a lost motorist, observed the perimeters, noting guard routines, potential weaknesses. Sarah, sometimes using her medical credentials as a pretext to be in the area, used her sharp eyes to spot details others would miss: surveillance cameras, reinforced doors, number of vehicles. Their intel confirmed Silas's network reports. The houses were being used for storage. Stolen goods, yes, but also large quantities of what looked like precursor chemicals and packaging materials for drug distribution. The vultures weren't just a protection racket anymore, they were moving into serious narcotics. The new guys from Nevada were likely connected to that. The first target was a small, nondescript house in a rural subdivision, surrounded by tall hedges. Frank and Sarah approached after midnight. Frank disabled the external lights and any simple alarm systems with quiet efficiency, skills honed over years of specialized work. Sarah covered the back. Silas was the entry man. He moved with a silence that was unnerving, flowing through the darkness. The front door wasn't just locked, it was barred from the inside. Silas examined it for a moment, then produced a small, specialized tool. It wasn't a lock pick. It was something more sophisticated, designed for breaching. A quiet click, a gentle twist, and the complex locking mechanism was bypassed. The bar. A carefully placed charge, barely audible, and it snapped free. Inside, 2 vultures were asleep on couches in the living room, snoring loudly, guns within easy reach. Silas moved through the room like a ghost, collecting the weapons silently. Frank followed, securing the room. Sarah moved deeper into the house. They found the stash in the basement. Boxes filled with electronics, tools, and other stolen items. But also crates containing bags of white powder and stacks of cash. This was confirmation. The vultures were deeper in than anyone thought. Instead of just taking the goods, Silas had a specific plan. They took some of the cash, enough to hurt but not everything, and scattered the rest to make it look like a quick, sloppy robbery. They loaded the stolen goods into Frank's van, parked discreetly down the road. But the chemicals and drugs? They left them. And planted small, undetectable tracking devices on some of the crates. They also left a message. Not spray-painted. Something more unsettling. On the living room wall, using a marker from the house, Silas drew a simple image, a small, precise drawing of a broken vulture feather. Nothing else. No words. They were gone before dawn, leaving the 2 vultures asleep, waking later to chaos and the discovery of their losses and the strange, unsettling symbol. The second target was a larger, isolated cabin by a lake. This one was guarded by 3 vultures. Silas, Frank, and Sarah again used a combination of stealth and precise action. Frank created a diversion on one side of the cabin, a small, controlled noise that drew one guard's attention. Sarah, using her medical knowledge and unsettling efficiency, incapacitated another with a single, precise strike to a nerve cluster. Silas handled the third guard and the inside. The engagement was swift, brutal, and silent. Again, no fatalities, just incapacitation. Inside, they found more stolen goods, more cash, and more drugs/chemicals. The same process was repeated, cash taken, stolen goods removed, drugs/chemicals tracked, and the broken vulture feather symbol left behind. The vulture's reaction was predictable, fury and confusion. They blamed each other. They accused rivals. Hammer was livid. 2 locations hit in 2 nights. Resources gone. And the symbol. The broken feather. What did it mean? Who was doing this? It's the old man. Hammer roared in the clubhouse, slamming his fist down. It's gotta be him. He sent someone. He's messing with us. Razor was less sure. Hammer, how could he do this? It was professional. Quiet. The guys inside didn't hear a thing until it was over. That old man from the gas station, he was tough, but this. He's got help. Hammer insisted, his face red. He must have. We need to find out who. And we need to find him. He's got to be behind it. The vultures stepped up their harassment, now actively searching for Silas or anyone they suspected of helping him. They shook down locals, demanding information, using increased violence. They raided Frank's auto, smashing windows and tools, but finding nothing. They knew Frank had met with Silas after the gas station incident. Sheriff Brody and Deputy Miller watched the escalation with growing concern. The incident reports spiked. Vandalism, intimidation, now simple assault charges. They're desperate, Miller observed, sorting through the new reports. They're flailing. Whoever's hitting them is doing a real number on their nerves. Brody nodded. Silas and his friends are making noise. Good. Keeps the vultures focused on them, not the county as a whole. For now, he looked at the report about Frank's auto. But Frank paid for it. He knew the risk, Miller said quietly. He told us. Said he'd rather fight than roll over. Brody got a coded message from Frank later that day. Targets acquired. Tracking active. They're moving the rest. Looks like a big shipment. This was it. The vultures, panicked by the hits on their safe houses and worried about future losses, were consolidating their remaining drug supply and likely planning to move it out of the county or to their most secure location, the clubhouse. This was the main operation, the real money. Hitting this would cripple them. Silas, Frank, and Sarah met again at the farm. The tracking devices were working. The remaining drugs and chemicals were being moved. They're consolidating everything, Sarah reported, looking at the data Frank was displaying on a laptop. Looks like they're heading for the quarry. The quarry? Frank looked at Silas. Why the quarry? Not the clubhouse. It's isolated, Silas mused. Hard to approach without being seen. Maybe they think it's safer to move it there first, less conspicuous than a direct run to the clubhouse. Or maybe it's a staging point. Or a dead drop. Sheriff Brody mentioned deputies seeing Nevada plates around the quarry, Sarah added. Could be they're meeting the buyers there. Or the guys who handle the transport. Silas's eyes lit up with a tactical thought. Meeting point. Isolated. Hard to approach. Sounds like an ambush site. For them. You want to hit them at the quarry? Frank asked. Silas, that's a strong position for them. All those high walls, choke points. Exactly, Silas said. But it's also a trap. If we can control the entrances. We know where they are. They don't know we know. And they don't know how we know. That paranoia is an advantage. How many guys they bringing? Sarah asked, looking at the tracker data, which showed multiple vehicles converging on the quarry. Looks like the main group, Frank said, counting the signals. Plus the Nevada boys. Maybe 15, 20 guys moving the goods. Another 10 or 15 waiting. Could be 30, 40 easy. Silas nodded. We can't take them head on. Not in the open. Not those numbers. We need to use the quarry itself against them. He unrolled a detailed map of the quarry, provided discreetly by Sheriff Brody from county planning records. He pointed out the single, winding access road, the sheer rock faces, the scattered piles of debris, the small, deep pool of water at the bottom. Choke point here, Silas indicated the road. We control that, they can't easily get in or out. High ground here and here, he marked 2 points on the map along the rim of the quarry. Ideal for observation. And for denying access. Who's we, Silas? Sarah asked. Still just us three. Silas looked at them. No. It's time. Frank, call the others. Over the next 2 days, more vehicles arrived quietly at Silas's farm. Not motorcycle gangs, but sturdy pickups, discreet SUVs, even a camouflaged ATV trailer. Men and women emerged, diverse in appearance but similar in their quiet competence and the serious, watchful look in their eyes. They were the others Silas had mentioned. More veterans. There was Maria, a former military police investigator, sharp and methodical, with an uncanny ability to read people and situations. There was Jackson, a former combat engineer, skilled with demolitions and setting up defenses/offenses using terrain. There was Ben, a quiet, younger veteran, expert in reconnaissance and communication. And a few others, equally capable, bound by shared experiences and an unspoken code. Frank and Sarah were the liaisons, introducing them to Silas, explaining the situation. The kitchen table planning sessions grew larger, more complex. Silas, standing at the head of the table, outlined the Iron Vulture's operation, their movements, their weaknesses. He listened to input from Frank, Sarah, Maria, and the others. He absorbed it all, filtering it through his own extensive experience. The plan for the quarry was refined. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was an intricate series of maneuvers designed to isolate, confuse, and trap the vultures, using the quarry's natural advantages and their own arrogance against them. Sheriff Brody met with Silas again, this time bringing Deputy Miller. He introduced Miller as someone he trusted completely. Silas and his team shared the plan, omitting some of the more unofficial details, but giving Brody enough to understand the general strategy and how law enforcement could play a role after the initial action. "We hit them when they're vulnerable," Silas explained to Brody, pointing at the map. "Moving the goods. They'll be focused on the transfer, not on perimeter security. We disrupt the drop. We isolate the main force in the quarry bowl." "How do you stop them getting out?" Brody asked. "We'll handle the access road," Silas said simply. Jackson nodded. "And how do you contain them inside?" "That's where the terrain comes in," Sarah said. "And strategic placement. We don't need to fight them all at once. We just need to make it impossible for them to organize, to escape, or to fight effectively." Brody looked at the map, then at the faces around the table: a farmer, a mechanic, a doctor, a former MP, an engineer. It was the strangest task force he'd ever seen. But he saw the calm competence in their eyes, the professionalism in their movements. He knew, instinctively, that these were people who could do what they said they could. "All right," Brody said. "Here's what the sheriff's department can do. We can set up checkpoints on the roads away from the quarry. If anyone tries to run from the quarry, they'll hit us. We can also stage units out of sight, ready to move in once the primary engagement is over and you signal." "Appreciate that, Sheriff," Silas said. "Your presence on the perimeter will be crucial for containment and for the cleanup. We handle the disruption phase." "And casualties?" Brody asked, looking at Sarah. Sarah's expression was grim. "Our objective is to neutralize the threat and apprehend minimum necessary force. But these men, they won't surrender easily. We'll be prepared for injuries on both sides. Mine are patched up and handed over to EMTs you bring in later. Theirs, well, they get what they get." The day arrived. A gray, overcast sky mirrored the tension. Silas and his team moved into position around the quarry long before the iron vultures arrived. They were ghosts in the landscape, using cover, communicating with hand signals and whispered words over secure channels. Jackson and Ben rigged the access road. Not with explosives to crater it, but with a cleverly placed, heavy steel net hidden beneath brush, designed to tangle motorcycles and vehicles, and remote-controlled barriers that could be raised or lowered quickly. It wouldn't destroy the road, but it would trap anyone trying to use it. Maria, Sarah, and others took positions on the high ground, providing observation and strategic fire points, though their primary weapons were less than lethal rounds mixed with live fire as a last resort. Their goal was to disable, not necessarily kill. Silas and Frank positioned themselves closer to the quarry floor, near the intended drop point, ready to initiate the disruption. The iron vultures arrived like a thunderclap. A convoy of motorcycles, several SUVs, and a large box truck lumbered down the access road and into the quarry bowl. Hammer was there, along with Razor, Ox, and the new, professional-looking guys from Nevada. They seemed relaxed, confident on their chosen ground. They began the transfer of goods from the truck. This was the moment. Silas gave the signal. On the access road, Jackson triggered the barrier. Heavy steel poles swung up, blocking the path. Ben detonated a small, precisely placed charge that deployed the net just behind the last vehicle, effectively sealing them in. Inside the quarry, chaos erupted. Silas and Frank initiated the disruption. Not with gunfire, but with carefully aimed shots from compressed air launchers firing paintballs filled with incredibly foul-smelling, non-toxic chemicals. The chemicals splattered onto the drugs and packaging, contaminating them instantly, making them worthless. "What the hell?" Hammer yelled, recoiling from the stench, seeing the paint splattering everywhere. Confusion reigned. The vultures drew their weapons, looking for the source of the attack. They looked to the high ground, but the attackers were hidden. They looked to the entrance, now blocked. Silas's team on the rim began their coordinated action. Not direct assault, but suppression and hurting. Non-lethal rounds zinged down, targeting legs, arms, tires. Shots pinged off the rocks around the vultures. It wasn't an attack to kill, but an attack designed to disorient, injure, and deny them cover. Up there. Hammer roared, pointing towards the rim. He ordered his men to return fire, but it was ineffective. They were firing blindly at hidden targets. The Nevada guys, though, were different. They were cooler, scanning the terrain, trying to identify positions, coordinate a response. One of them spotted movement and returned accurate fire towards Sarah's position. Contact. High right. Sarah called out calmly over the comms. Silas and Frank began moving through the quarry floor, staying low, using the scattered rocks and equipment for cover. Their goal was to keep the vultures off balance, prevent them from massing or organizing a breakout. Hammer, realizing he was trapped and his valuable cargo was ruined, focused his rage on finding an escape. He ordered Ox to try and smash through the barriers on the access road. Ox, despite his size, found the steel too robust, the net too strong. They were stuck. The fight inside the quarry became a deadly game of hide-and-seek. The vultures were powerful in a straight fight, but disorganized and frustrated when facing an enemy they couldn't see, who used the environment like a weapon. Silas's team picked them apart, separating them, taking them down one or two at a time. Maria used her understanding of human behavior, calling out instructions and taunts designed to sow confusion among the vultures, mimicking their own comms or pretending to be internal arguments. Sarah, despite being engaged by the Nevada professional, coolly returned fire, targeting his weapon or limbs, forcing him to take cover. Silas and Frank moved towards the center of the chaos, seeking out Hammer and the remaining leaders. This was their ground game, up close and personal. Hammer, seeing his forces dwindling and trapped, grew increasingly desperate. He finally spotted Silas moving behind some equipment. "You," he screamed, raising his weapon. "I'll kill you, old man." Silas didn't flinch. He moved forward, closing the distance. This was the confrontation he had engineered. Hammer was strong, brutal, but his skill was crude compared to Silas's refined lethality. Hammer fired, but Silas was already in motion, weaving, flowing. The shots went wide. Silas was inside his guard in an instant. It wasn't a fight, it was a dismantling. A disarm, swift and painful. A strike to the joint, disabling the arm. Hammer roared in pain and frustration. Razor and the remaining Nevada professional tried to converge on Silas. Frank engaged Razor, using the cluttered environment to his advantage, turning the chase into a series of unexpected corners and obstacles that frustrated the biker. Sarah, having suppressed the professional on the high ground, rappelled down a sheer rock face, a silent angel of combat, coming in behind him. He never saw her coming. A quick, decisive move, and he was neutralized. Silas faced Hammer alone. Hammer, weapon gone, resorted to brute force, lunging with pure rage. Silas met him not with strength, but with technique. He used Hammer's own momentum against him, throwing the larger man with a clean, powerful judo-style move. Hammer hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him again. Frank had Razor cornered, weapon discarded, facing Frank's steely gaze. Ox was trapped under the steel net on the road, tangled and frustrated. The rest of the vultures were scattered, wounded, or captured by other members of Silas's team descending from the rim. Silas stood over Hammer, who lay gasping on the quarry floor. "You said you owned this county," Silas said, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "You own nothing here. Not the land, not the people. Respect isn't taken. It's earned." Hammer looked up at the unimposing figure in overalls standing over him, and for the first time, saw not an old man, but a force of nature, rooted deeper than he could ever comprehend. Silas turned, nodding to his team. "It's over. Secure the perimeter. Check for injuries. Notify the sheriff." Sheriff Brody and Deputy Miller arrived with their units as planned, converging on the quarry from the prearranged staging points. They found a scene of controlled chaos. Bikers, disarmed and subdued, were sitting on the ground, many nursing injuries from non-lethal rounds or tactical takedowns. The damaged box truck and motorcycles were tangled at the entrance. The quarry stank of the chemicals used to contaminate the drugs. Silas, Frank, and Sarah were supervising, ensuring everyone was secure and accounted for. The rest of their team melted away into the surrounding woods, leaving no trace of their presence. They were ghosts again, their job done. Brody looked around, amazed. This wasn't a bloody shootout, it was a tactical victory, meticulously executed. The Iron Vultures, the gang that had terrorized his county, were neutralized. He walked over to Silas, who looked tired but resolute. "Silas," Brody said, shaking his head slightly. "You weren't kidding about having relevant experience." "They won't be bothering anyone anymore, Sheriff," Silas said. "The evidence is here. Drugs, stolen goods, weapons. Plus, I'm sure the county will have questions about the damage to the quarry entrance and the vehicles." Brody grinned. "Yeah. Plenty of questions. Lucky we have suspects in custody, huh?" He paused, looking at Silas. "And lucky we had unofficial help. Just a farmer protecting his land," Silas said with a slight shrug. "Some farmer," Brody muttered, looking at the sheer faces of the quarry walls surrounding the defeated gang. "Some land." The aftermath was swift and transformative. The Iron Vultures, their leadership captured and their operation exposed and crippled, were broken. Hammer, Razor, Ox, and the Nevada professionals faced serious federal charges due to the drug trafficking element and the interstate nature of their operation. The local vultures were rounded up on various charges. The corruption within the county administration was exposed, partly thanks to information Silas and his team had gathered and discreetly passed to Sheriff Brody and Deputy Miller, who used it to build their official case. Corrupt officials were arrested. The county began to heal. Businesses reopened, fear receded. People felt safe again. There was a renewed sense of community, of standing together. Sheriff Brody and Deputy Miller were hailed as heroes, bringing down the gang and cleaning up the local government. They accepted the praise, but they knew the full, unofficial truth. Brody sometimes visited Silas at his farm, sharing a quiet cup of coffee, talking about the county. They had an unspoken understanding, a shared secret. Silas returned to his quiet life, working his farm. The beat-up red truck still got him where he needed to go. To most people, he was still just the quiet farmer. But those who knew, those who had seen, understood the steel beneath the unassuming exterior. They saw the wisdom in his eyes, the quiet strength in his hands. The rumor spread quietly through the county, whispered at the gas station, in the diner, at the feed store. Not just that Silas was a tough old vet, but that he was the owner of half the county, not necessarily meaning the physical land, but the economic heart of it, the spirit of its independence, the bedrock of its community. The man who held the roots. And the Iron Vultures learned their lesson. They had laughed at an old truck and an old man, thinking he was weak, thinking he was nothing. They had no idea that the farmer wasn't just the owner of half the county in property deeds, but in will, in courage, and in a hidden, formidable strength that would rise to defend what was his. They had underestimated the quiet man, and it had cost them everything. Silas had restored the peace, not with arrogance or cruelty, but with quiet competence, strategic brilliance, and the unwavering resolve of a man protecting his home and his people. The county was safe again, and the land was still his, now more truly than ever. Up next you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.